Well, our native insects have not evolved to live in exotic pasture or to prey on the invasive insects that they do. Planting botanical species to attract the enemies of pests is becoming very popular around the world as primary producers search for effective, non-synthetic pest control strategies. It's a pest management strategy known as conservation biocontrol. And part of an opinion piece our next guest has written on Farmers Weekly. You can check that out, farmersweekly.co.nz. Joining us now to discuss a paper he just published in the Journal of Insect Science, Professor Stephen Goldson, Deputy Director at Bioprotection Research Centre right here on Lincoln University campus. Good evening, Stephen. How are you?
I'm all right. Hello.
Stephen, why does New Zealand have a very high exotic pasture pest burden?
Well, and I'm talking about intensive pastures here, downland and flatland pastures, which are farmed intensively, don't have many plant species in them. When they're highly productive, there's a predominance of ryegrasses and clovers. And the result of that is high yields, high production, but no resistance to pests that come in, invasive species. Because these pastures only have a couple of plants introduced from Europe, there's lots of gaps in that ecosystem for pests to enter and come in and cause a lot of problems. So a lot of our pests, which aren't pests anywhere else, become big pests here because there isn't the natural enemies in our pastures that there are in, if you like, older ecosystems in Europe and around the world.
So our intensively farmed systems have effectively warned off these natural enemies that have been a part of our ecosystem. What type of things are we talking about? You know, you've got the Argentine and stem weevil, but, you know, there's a wide range of them, isn't there?
Yes, there is. I think something like 90% of our pasture pests are exotic from overseas. The big ones that aren't are grass scrub and perina, who've made it out of the tussocks into our so-called improved pastures. But everything else, the stem weevil, Argentine stem weevil, clover root weevil, lucerne weevil, all sorts of other ones, have broken the biosecurity barrier and got in here and built up to big numbers.
We've heard today the essential freshwater regulations is capping nitrogen levels, Stephen. What is some of those things that New Zealand farmers can do to maintain their sort of pest control, and what is that sort of economic impact?
Well, I don't want to sound too kind of pessimistic about the lack of biocontrols. One of the things to bear in mind is that the very thing that's allowed the pests to thrive is probably allowing the biocontrol agents to thrive. But these biocontrol agents are ones we've introduced from overseas. They're not the ones that are in our native ecosystems. So the biocontrol agent we brought in from South America has done a good job on Argentine stem weevil. We brought one in for clover root weevil. That's doing well. And another one from Morocco is dealing with the lucerne weevil. So the upside of this is that our biocontrol agents do exceptionally well in our grasslands, in our pastures, because they too benefit from the lack of natural enemies of their own when they're introduced into New Zealand. So I believe that we've had extraordinary success with these introduced biocontrol agents. And the thing now is for us to understand why they're working and how to make sure they keep working. That's actually a science problem as much as a management problem.
What would you do with a biosecurity budget, Stephen, in regards to the protection? I mean, we have some of the best biosecurity in the world, to be fair, don't we? Or not enough?
So, yeah. Well, it's like the health service or education, but really, really now, after the COVID or during the COVID thing, never has New Zealand had more to lose than to lose its reputation as an impeccably clean and well-controlled country. So now, in order to maintain trade links and trade reputation, we really must keep stuff out. Therefore, I think biosecurity is more important than ever. And we have to maintain our reputation. Now, one of the problems with biosecurity is as we get climate change, we're getting different types of natural pests coming in, and probably our trade routes are changing as well. these continue to cause threats to our biosecurity.
We do produce a wonderful podcast here, Stephen, for the wonderful ladies at Foundation for Arable Research and Men. And I've learned a lot about disease resistance in arable crops, and it's a rising problem. And do so also our pastures as well. So this is really our next step, but also too very marketable to our consumer as well.
All right, so the marketability of our produce is of supreme importance. We get premiums on certainly our grassland products because they know where these products have come from, and there's increasing interest in traceability and provenance and all of these things. This is all wound into the biosecurity story as well. I mean, I would say what I'm going to say, wouldn't I? But I do think that biosecurity is well supported by science. We can increase the density and intensity of border interceptions, but it's got to be science-based.
Mm-hmm. How does a regenerative system and a holistic ecosystem sort of fit into what you're talking about?
Well, I think those terms are new terms for probably a collection of old approaches. And so the swings and roundabouts, what looks like a good opportunity with regenerative, for example, trampling in green manure, I'm not sure, but it may result in more methane being introduced. The idea of sustainability, regenerative, organic, has to be based on science rather than belief systems.
And certainly I understand that's well underway, Stephen, in terms of the funding and framework around that. But at the same time, you're very much on the same page with increasing biodiversity so that we can have those biocontrols to the ecosystem that we're talking about here on New Zealand farms.
I'd like to make something clear. I don't want to be a sort of Jerry Meyer. I do believe that biodiversity of plants in the farming ecosystem is a great thing to have because of the birds, because of the aesthetics. Make no mistake, my only comment in the paper was I don't think if they're exotic species, they'll necessarily bring in natural enemies, of which there are a lot, but are in our indigenous or natural native ecosystems, but don't go into our pastures. There are 15 million years of evolutionary difference between our ryegrass, clovers, and European grasses and what we've got in our native ecosystems. So the natural enemies in the native ecosystems don't really know what's going on in the pastures. They don't recognize it.
I love talking to you, Stephen. You've got so much wealth of knowledge in the Bioprotection Research Centre that's here at Lincoln University, set up in 2003 with a drive to provide more innovation and sustainable approaches to pest, pathogen and weed control, which is very well needed. Thank you so much for your time, sir, and I'm sure that we will be in touch in the very near future.
Thank you very much, Sarah.
This is Sarah's Country.